Meanwhile, let's bring in Newt Gingrich, former Speaker of the House. He ran for President of the United States. He's a Fox News contributor as well, and the author of a big New York Times bestseller that must drive them crazy. It's called Understanding Trump. Newt Gingrich joins us right now.
Good morning.
From Arlington, Virginia. Newt, good morning to you.
It's good to be with you. Good to be with you.
So you're sitting right now in Arlington, Virginia, not far from the Arlington National Cemetery, where there are Confederate memorials. The big debate this morning is whether or not these symbols are symbols of our history or of hate, and should they be removed. Where does Newt Gingrich come down on this?
Yeah. You know, I watched this, and you go back to the French Revolution, where they decided to destroy the past. You watch the Taliban, which decided to blow up Buddhist monuments that were 2,000 years old. You watched ISIS, which destroyed ancient history. I think that we ought to be clear about this. Maybe we need a committee to perfect American history. And it could go through and decide, for example, Senator Bob Byrd, a Democrat, had belonged to the Ku Klux Klan. Should we erase all the different references to Bob Byrd? Former member of the Supreme Court, Hugo Black, had been a member of the Ku Klux Klan. Should we erase all memory of Hugo Black? You can go down a whole long list of things. What's the ground rule going to be? And I think what's truly tragic about this, I understand the symbolism, but what's truly tragic is there is a huge wave of murder in Baltimore. There's a huge wave of shootings in Chicago. There are enormous problems in helping every person have a chance to pursue happiness. All of this stuff is a lot of noise. It doesn't fix a single one of the underlying key problems that trap people in poverty and violence in America.
Well, some Democratic leaders are hoping that it could be more than just noise. It could be maybe a platform for them if they decide to run for president in 2020. Governor Terry McAuliffe has been out calling to remove these statues. Cory Booker is the latest one. He says that I will be introducing a bill to remove Confederate statues from the U.S. Capitol building. This is just one step. We have much more work to do. Newt, it was interesting. Steve Bannon, obviously a key advisor to the president, spoke out recently. We don't usually hear him speak publicly, but he said if Democrats double down on this issue, that's not going to be a winning one for them at the polls. Republicans then need to focus on the economy. What do you make of that?
Well, I think, first of all, it depends on how this evolves. If you really look at the hard left, they would eliminate Washington. I'm not sure what they do with the Washington Monument, but they would eliminate Washington. They would eliminate Jefferson. They both owned slaves. Would they then sandblast them in Rapid City, South Dakota, off of that mountain? I mean, you start getting into a zone here of whose history is it? Who are you to define it? And how do you go back 250 years and apply this year's standards to somebody back then? I mean, there's a whole zone here of wanting to erase America on the left that I think is very real. On the other hand, I do think the president was inadequate initially, particularly when he began to say there were some good people in that crowd of neo-Nazis and alt-right. Look, if you're a good person and you hear people chanting anti-Semitic chants and you see somebody wearing a Nazi flag, you leave. You don't stay. I mean, the people, I think Republicans have to condemn unequivocally the kind of violence and bigotry and racism that we saw in Charlottesville. At the same time, we ought to condemn the left, because it's clear if you look at the ACLU's tapes, or rather their tweets, the ACLU, a liberal organization, says, look, both sides were fighting in Charlottesville, not just the neo-Nazis.
Do you think the president needs to come out and say anything from what happened just 2 days ago?
Yes. I went back and checked. In 1997, Donald Trump wrote a book called The Art of the Comeback. I think he should take a couple days here in August and reread his own book. I think that he is much more isolated than he thinks he is. He has much weaker support in the Congress than he thinks he does. And I think a lot of it is, frankly, self-inflicted. I mean, he had a perfectly good press conference yesterday if he had stopped. I mean, they were talking about infrastructure. It's a unifying, bipartisan, positive step on the agenda. And I am sure everybody standing around him was stunned to have him wander off and reopen an issue that he had successfully the day before put to rest. He has got to become substantially more disciplined and more reliable, because people don't know each morning what to expect, and that's dramatically weakening him into getting things done in the Congress.
But, Mr. Speaker, you know Donald Trump. You've known him for a number of years. When he is attacked, he hits back 10 times harder. And apparently, according to Axios yesterday morning, apparently he was so surprised at the overwhelming negative attention that he was getting from his initial statement, which many felt was way too vague. He needed to name groups, and he said at that press conference that he did not, simply because it was breaking news, didn't know who was all involved, but he wanted to go back to campaign-style attack mode, which got him to the presidency.
Right, but it doesn't help him as president. You know, President Reagan had this problem twice. Once in August of 1980 during the campaign, when he had a week that was just terrible, stumbling all over the place, and again with the Iran-Contra crisis that broke out in late 1986. Both times Reagan was in deep trouble. Both times he stopped, thought through what he had to get done, did it with enormous discipline, stuck to his message. I mean, there are a lot of underlying things going very, very well. The Veterans Administration, the economy. We have the lowest level of teenage unemployment we've had, I think, since 1966. I mean, there are a lot of things going well. If the president would be disciplined and focused, he would more than recover in 3 weeks and be in a great position this fall to get tax cuts and other things through the Congress.
Mr. Speaker, I want to switch gears here to the Steve Bannon interview part talking about North Korea. Here's what Steve Bannon said. He says, quote, "There's no military solution to North Korea's nuclear threats. Forget it. Until somebody solves the part of the equation that shows me that 10 million people in Seoul don't die in the first 30 minutes from conventional weapons, I don't know what you're talking about. There's no military solution here. They got us. To me, the economic war with China is everything, and we have to be maniacally focused on that." Mr. Speaker, do you agree?
No. For a practical reason, I do 2 newsletters a week at Gingrich Productions that are free. The newsletter I did last Friday took one city and said, this is what a nuclear attack would be like in one city. And I think we have to understand, and North Korea, which is armed, and it may well be that we can't stop them, in which case we're going to have to rebuild all of our defense systems, because losing one American city to a nuclear weapon would change this country permanently. So I don't think it's an either-or. Yes, I'm very much for being more aggressive with the Chinese over economic policy. At the same time, I think we had better find a way to deal with North Korea. And frankly, I mean, I don't know what Bannon thinks he was accomplishing. The fact is, if you have General Mattis lined up, and you have General Kelly lined up, and you have General McMaster lined up, and you have Secretary Tillerson lined up, and you have the United Nations ambassador lined up, maybe if you're a senior White House advisor, it's useful not to screw it up. And it's useful not to be out there. You know, it's useful not to be out there as alone. You know, you may, if you're a senior White House advisor, you make your argument in the Oval Office. You make your argument in the Chief of Staff's office.
He said he thought it was off the record.
This is a little bit reminiscent. Oh, baloney. Steve Bannon is a professional. This kind of stuff is just, this reminds me of Scaramucci. You know, you don't go off and do this stuff.
Yeah.
Well,
not if you're going to be an inside advisor.
It usually, as we've seen, doesn't always end well. Speaker, good to have you with us this morning.
Thanks for being here, sir.